More and more, we're being presented with alarming facts and figures about the climate crisis and hearing calls to action to save our planet. For many, with that comes an anxiety, something that's being coined eco-anxiety. Joining us to dive deep into the topic, Dr. Karyn Gordon, as well as Canadian author of Greenwood, Michael Christie. Come on in and have a seat. It's great to have you both here. And, you know, I want to start by talking about Greenwood, an incredible book. This book spans hundreds of years. And the reason why we wanted to have you as part of this conversation is because there is a reverence for trees in this book that I have yet to see in another work of art that is fiction.
Yes.
Which is amazing. There's also something happening, a major climate event called the Great Withering.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
The Great Withering is a climate disaster that has struck the world in the year 2038.
Yeah.
And most of the trees across the planet have withered and died. And other than a small section of forest that figures prominently in the book.
Yes, in Canada, by the way.
Yes, in Canada.
Oh.
Yes.
We have a small section of forest that has lasted. And so you're in this world where people have this incredible, they put trees on such a pedestal because they realize now that trees were actually the keys to life. And without the trees, there's dust, there's wilderness, there's people that are dying from diseases that have to do with dust.
Yep.
So while you're reading this book, you get scared. Cool. I would love to know where the idea came from for this. Does this come from a personal place?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because people call it a dystopian novel, which I don't like because, you know, I live on a small island off the coast of Vancouver called Galliano Island, very forested place, and there the western red cedar, which is the tree of British Columbia, the provincial tree, is many of them are withering and dying due to climate stress.
Yes.
And so it's a very personal story for me, and unfortunately it didn't require much imagination.
Which is the scary thing, right?
It is scary, absolutely.
So you read through it, and for me, what was particularly salient was the fact that this could happen, and it could happen sooner rather than later. And so we're sort of in this time when I get to hear even from my kids, you know, they're watching TV and they're sort of taking it in, and they're like, well, am I going to live to 50, 60, 70? Like, what's happening with the environment? And so we want to deal with how to deal with that. It's not a tale, it's not fiction, it's actually reality. So then what do we do to handle our families and ourselves so that we're not dealing every day with anxiety? And that's sort of where you come in, Karyn.
Yeah, so fascinating. First of all, we had a great connection back. My husband is from one of the same close islands as him, and my husband, to put himself through school, he planted 1 million trees over 10 years. So this whole issue around trees and nature that's focused on the book is really cool, and part of the solution when we actually start diving into this topic.
Okay.
All right.
So can you give us some tips?
Yeah, so I was chatting with the audience. I love chatting with the audience beforehand, just really understanding, like, what is this eco-anxiety? So this is like it's been around for a long time, but certainly it's now getting a lot of traction, right? And it's like the doom and gloom of kind of with what's actually happening with our environment.
Right.
You know, and with, you know, the long-term effects of actually climate change from extreme heat and drought, and everything is extreme in terms of fires, and so how that's actually impacting people is really interesting. So you'll see kind of this range where you'll have some denial to fear, to panic, to like massive anxiety. So you're going to have this range. And so I think what's really interesting is that we're all part of it. I mean, that's why your book is fascinating, is because we were talking about this backstage. It forces us to have the conversation. Right? Like, do you have eco-anxiety? Do I have it? Like, all of a sudden now we're having the conversation, which is why books like this is just so powerful, right?
Absolutely. So when you're in a situation when you're looking, you know, at this 16-year-old Swedish activist, you're listening to Greta Thunberg, and she has got the hearts and the minds of our kids. And she's got this beautiful message where she's trying to help. And by the way, the grown-ups that were attacking this child, I was like, grow up. I could not believe the vitriol that I read online about this 16-year-old activist. Anyways, that's my opinion. I digress. But you're hearing it and you're seeing the passion, and then you're seeing people come away saying, well, that's not really true. That's not really
Yes.
true.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
There's some hyperbole happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that that's the right answer. The right answer is, what do we do with this information so that we can feel better about our lives every day?
Absolutely. And realizing, like, so the stats, so Yale did a study, they said about 20% of people are extremely concerned about 20, that's 1 out of every 5.
Yeah.
So when we actually really stop and think, this is not just Greta. And by the way, if you've not seen her, you need to follow her and watch it. Like, she is just this passion little 16-year-old that is really kind of like taking this in, and running with it. So, 21% of us are like having extreme concern. And so I think that's a fact. And so the key question then is, what do we do about it? And the criticism with her, I think a lot of times is people think she's just kind of stirring things up and kind of making us all like super freaked out. But that kind of comes with solutions, and we like to talk about solutions on this show.
Yeah, I think also when the argument that you're just stirring things up, she's stirring things up because it's imminent.
Well, and it impacts her, right?
It impacts her, and I think that there is a problem when we start getting upset with people vocalizing a problem, but you're not upset about the problem.
Yes.
Let's be upset about the problem.
I totally agree.
Right.
Let's not be so upset about the person that is vocalizing that we need to do something, we need to take action.
Right.
And I think it's so important to look to young people because they're not jaded in the way that we are.
Right.
They see nature and they recognize how wonderful it is.
Yes. Yeah.
And the fact that it is being degraded to them is an outrage, right? And we ought to feel how they do. I think, and Greta is a great example. I have 2 young sons, and they look up to her, and that is something to value. I think. Yeah.
So a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old.
6-year-old and a 10-year-old boy.
Do they come to you and do they express concern?
They do. I mean, it's so hard. We watch, BBC Planet Earth style documentaries. Particularly, my youngest son is really into animals and nature.
Yeah.
And we get to the end of the documentary where it says, the polar bear is like hanging on a piece of ice, and it's hard for them to hunt now that the Arctic is shrinking, and he gets very emotional, and and it's so hard to watch, with him, but it's kind of it's activated me in my own life. I've always been interested in climate, and environmental issues, but having my kids be interested is really sort of, focused me on that problem.
It gives us a jumping point.
For sure.
So can you give us some tips, some takeaway tips for us to try at home to sort of allay some of the fears?
Sure. So a few things really quick. Number one, we need to face the facts. Denial doesn't do anybody any good, okay?
Right.
So we need it. This is why the book is good. This is why the shows like this are good. All of a sudden, we're now having this conversation. So we need to face the facts. Number 2, we need to find the right balance. The balance, so we can either have like, oh my God, we're all gonna die. Okay, not helpful. Okay, it's not helpful. It's not helpful. We need to say, okay, yes, there are some serious problems. So what are the things that we can actually do? So, okay, so we need to kind of find the right balance. So my encouragement after this show is that we all kind of have that conversation with our family, with our friends, with our coworkers. What are we particularly going to do? Is it going to be driving less? Is it consuming less? Is it making our home more energy efficient? Is it getting involved in green spaces? This whole issue around nature. Nature is a secret. There's such a huge part to this whole problem. That when we actually basically keeps our green spaces safe, all of a sudden it's reducing the carbon dioxide. All of a sudden it actually increases our mental health. So nature is a huge part, and how we have to protect it is a huge part to this problem. A huge part of the solution. And then all of a sudden maybe getting involved politically too.
Why not?
Why not?
Like,
let's take action. Let's not let's feel it, but let's actually do something about it.
I would like to encourage everyone to go out and read this book. It was honestly, I read a lot of books, everybody, and this was one of my absolute favorites. And I think it's because it is an absolute perfect. It's a screenplay. It should be a movie. Like, it's so good.
Should be a movie.
Like, put it out there. It should be a movie. The way you will feel about using a whole roll of paper towel to clean up your kid's barf will change. You'll start sectioning off little pieces.
That's my job.
Just section off little pieces, right? So, and start respecting the nature that you're in. Like, I have started even walking the dog differently. I'm paying attention to the grass and the trees and the bark. So it's a beautiful, beautiful book here, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks both of you for joining us.
Thanks.